Good evening. Good evening. Jade Simmons here. Hope that you had a restful and blessed Easter weekend, that you were able to gather in your own way, to worship in your own way. Those of you who celebrate Easter, I know it was just as amazing of a weekend as it always is. I think this has been such an incredible reminder of not only what's important to us, but how we celebrate what's important to us. And we're being, well, shown very quickly that we don't have to do things the way we've always done them to still give them significance and meaning in our lives. So, welcome back to the week. I hope that you're finding this already to be a blessed start of the week for you, a productive start of the week. I'm pulling up all my windows here so that I can be sure to see you in real time as much as possible. My name is Jade Simmons, and I am 2020 independent candidate for President of the United States. Yes, you heard me right. No, this is not for pretend. No, this is not a career move. In fact, it may be exactly the opposite of that. But one of the things that I teach, preach, write about, tweet, post as often as possible is that we're designed to become bigger, bolder versions of ourselves all the time. And part of the way that we know how to reinvent and who to become is we start by listening to the world around us. We listen for where the gaps are, where the voids are. We listen for the voice that we're not hearing. We watch for the action that we don't see being taken. And then we ask ourselves very hard questions. Is the somebody that we keep waiting for, is the superhero that we keep hoping for, is the voice that we keep listening for, might that voice come from me? Might that voice come from you? And when you ask those hard questions, you find yourself giving yourself a very hard answer. And so for those of you who are still wondering, what the heck is she doing? Well, she is answering a call and answering a need. And so as I listen to what's going on in our society, what I don't hear is a voice that speaks against the division. I don't hear solutions that for once in our recent history would dare to find common ground between two extremely polarized sides. I don't hear my faith as a Christian being represented powerfully. I do see my faith being hijacked. I do see versions of my faith that look like nothing that I've learned about. I feel often, as you do, that it seems our votes are entitled to certain sides. And so one of the reasons that Operation Restoration exists, if you want to learn more about that movement, you're going to go to operationrestoration2020.com. One of the reasons that we exist is because we believe there should be representation and a voice for the millions, mind you, millions of Americans who feel politically homeless. We're listening, we're straining our ear, and we don't hear voices that sound like ours. We don't hear heartbeats that are beating in sync with ours. And why would we dare not present an option that allows the rest of us to be able to sleep easy at night, knowing that our voice, our beliefs, our desires, our concerns are being heard? That's why I'm here. That's why I'm running. And the reason I'm doing it now is because the time is now. When you look around and you don't see the solutions that you've been craving, you must ask yourself, could it possibly be that I have something to offer this world? You're going to make sure you're following us on Operation Restoration 2020 Facebook page as well. Those of you who've been, man, thank you so much for your enthusiasm. You've been hitting us up behind the scenes, wondering how do we get involved? Simply text RESTORE to 33777. If you want to know how do I do something now, you'll notice we're not asking for donations right now. We don't think that's the time for this. We see people struggling, and we believe that the best thing we can do is serve people right now in their greatest time of need. Whoever is the next leader of this nation needs to be a servant leader. Their first priority needs to always be people over profit, people over party, people over partisanship, people over winning. And I think we have to define winning by thinking of it in terms of victory. How many small victories can we gain for as many demographics of the American people as possible? How much can we dare to do for as many people possible, especially during the times where It'd be more natural right now to be self-centered, to be self-focused. You have every right to be thinking about you and yours and nothing else. But what a miraculous thing in a time where you have every right to be self-centered, to dare to be service-oriented. That's the type of leadership we believe we should have now. And you'll hear me say this as often as possible. If you want to know how your leaders are going to lead, you look at how they have been living. And so I believe we can't really get upset with our leadership when they are living and leading, when they are leading exactly like how they have always lived. So we're jumping in tonight. We have a theme for the week. If you're new to the Daily Debrief, what we do here is I break down some part of the news. I'm going to start becoming more and more narrowly focused on one or two issues so that we can not only give you the thrust behind the issue, what you need to know, but I would love to lead a nation that is the most informed, the most clarified. And I want you to experience what it means to have truly transparent leadership, truly transparent governance. And I think we should be sharing information in a way that empowers people. It should never be used to divide you, but to give you clarified understanding so that you can use your independent mind and make decisions for yourself. Last week, go back and watch. It was a long episode. We talked about what was going on in voting in America. That's going to be a big issue coming up now. I'm not only concerned about it because I'm running for president, I'm concerned about it as a registered voter. I want to make sure that my voice is able to be heard, and you should too. Go back and watch that episode because there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So in the next few weeks, I'll be focusing more on the issues that aren't getting as much attention. You want COVID coverage, you can find that everywhere. I'm going to try to bring you coverage on issues that not only affect you as individuals, affect us as a nation, that are not only being affected by COVID and how we handle it, but these are issues that I also will be able to present to you so that you can better understand the Operation Restoration stance on the issue. And I call that the restorative stance. So right now, no matter where you look, you're almost always going to see a lopsided presentation of the issues. And they're going to be lopsided in a way to make you think the way that whoever is bringing you the information wants you to think. And you better believe that way is going to benefit whatever their outcome is. We have to now become smarter with how we consume information. We have to demand more of our leaders. We should be asking for our leaders to speak to us and care for us in a way that's not just about them either attaining power or retaining power, but that is truly about broadening perspective and presenting opportunity for as many Americans as possible. So the theme this week is that we must now begin to have equal outrage. So every night this week, I'm bringing you things that you can't dare be mad about on one side, but then feign ignorance on the other. That when the issue comes back around, but it doesn't look exactly the same way, it's not hitting the demographic that you care about the most, suddenly you don't care about the issue anymore. That's lopsided. And when we behave that way, we give permission for our leaders to behave that way. So you better believe later this week, we'll talk about how suddenly everyone's so concerned about the plight of African Americans during COVID, when the very thing that has them experiencing this virus more than others is the same stuff that had them in a disadvantage, had us African Americans in a disadvantaged position before COVID. So we can't feign concern and outrage now if we're not also going to carry that concern with us into our new normal. We want to make sure that suddenly demographics aren't being used as headline winners, but not being served after the headlines become old, right? Equal outrage. We should also be outraged right now. We got really upset with the president, really upset with Americans when they were expressing racism towards Chinese and Asian Americans. Remember that? We got all up in arms about that. We called that xenophobia. Haven't seen the same outrage now that we hear China is doing the very same thing to Africans and Blacks and Black Americans who are over there. Matter of fact, our government is warning African Americans not to travel to China right now. They are being discriminated against, kicked out of bars and restaurants, and having leases not being able to sign their leases again because they are being accused now of bringing COVID back to China. So we can't be upset on this side and not be upset on the other. Equal outrage, what that does is it lets our leaders know that they can't use our emotions just for their gain. That if we're looking and seeing racism in one place, we must keep our eyes open for it in every place. If we're seeing discrimination, if we're seeing economic disadvantage in one place and it affects us, we must also be outraged about economic disadvantage in a different demographic. So I think fairness even begins with how we express outrage. Tonight, what I think we need to be continually keeping our eyes on, remember the stimulus package that passed, historic amount of money has now gone out or is in the process of going out. And one of my concerns was, hey, let's make sure this is not like 2008, where we bailed out a bunch of banks and they lose a lot of that money that they got from the government to give incredibly oversized bonuses to their leadership. That's not what that money was supposed to be for. This time around, it seems like government has learned its lesson. They've built in stipulations that require, I know for my company, small business, that we are going to need to keep our employees, right? If we want to have that loan forgiven. We can't get the money from the government or from our banks and then fire everybody and use that money as we wish. That money is designated to pay for payroll, that if we have to make pay cuts when we get that loan, we should return those workers to their original salaries. First of all, because it's only right. It's only right, right? Secondly, because it's a part of the agreement. So remember, the thing we were so concerned about was how workers were going to be treated during this. How was the everyday worker going to be treated? Many of us expressed great outrage when we thought that only billion-dollar companies would be helped and that this was going to be a top-down relief effort. Kudos to both sides of government here for working together to make sure that the everyday worker was taken care of. But there is another demographic that we need to keep our eyes on and we need to be concerned about. It's our farmers. And what I'm talking about tonight are our farm workers, specifically our foreign farm workers. You might have heard, it's not front page news yet, but there are a few articles written about this now. The government right now, the Trump administration, wants to provide relief to farmers. Now, isn't that a wonderful phrase? We want to provide relief to farmers. Farmers have gotten a bit of a raw deal, unfortunately for them, because they are some of the strongest, most dependable voting bloc, where not only Republicans, but President Trump is concerned, that they were hurt very badly by some of the retaliatory trade tariffs that have been going on. That hurt farmers, and that's a big deal for President Trump because that's an important part of his voting base. And so right now he's thinking about them as he's wanting to provide relief to farmer and the farm industry. But the way that they're doing it is what we need to keep our our eyes on. They're providing relief to farmers by lowering the wages of migrant workers. And you're saying, look, Jade, that's foreign workers. That's not us. That's only 10% of the farm worker population. And I'll tell you why that's not the case. But a lot of people aren't as worried about it because they're thinking we got to help our farmers. But the way that we're doing it is that we are looking to cut the wages now of migrant workers. So the wild thing is we're seeing a unified resistance from both Trump supporters and from advocates for labor rights. So the federal government, if you didn't know this, they can actually set wages for guest workers from other countries. That's meant to make sure that the wages they have hold up so that foreign workers are not underpaid and so that we're not undercutting the wages of US residents. So we have a Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Perdue, Sonny Perdue. And so what he's been saying is, look, for a long time now, there have been challenges in the farming industry. And so when we talk about farm workers, we're specifically talking about the H-2A program. And so what's happening is this, what I want you to pay attention to. We have to be very careful that we don't use crises as cover-ups. And we come back to that. We'd be very careful that we don't use crises as cover-up for other intentions and other motives. So it sounds like we really want to help our farmers, which is really crucial. We talk about essential workers right now, just so you know, farmers and farm workers are considered essential workers. If you're still eating food, you're still able to go to the grocery store, you're still able to get fresh produce, you want to thank a farmer when you see them and thank a farm worker, whether they are domestic or foreign because they played a role in getting that food to your table. Right now, while you're staying at home, there are migrant workers, domestic farm workers that are still going out in fields. Many of them do not have protective gear. Many of them are staying in substandard housing conditions, not able to even social distance right now. So they are literally just like your frontline healthcare workers, risking their life and limb to put food on your table. Do not let anyone tell you they are not essential workers, not just the farmers, but the farm workers as well. Okay, this is really crucial here. So what the administration is looking to do is cut those wages. What's the point? Well, we want to help farmers, right? And the way that the administration is proposing is we'll lower the wages. That's going to help farmers survive and compete. So what you'll hear, the storyline that you'll hear, which has truth in it, is that we must help our farmers who are also suffering in this crisis. And this is how we are providing them relief. Now, when you hear that, I don't want you to mistake that to think of that as direct money. They should also, and I'm sure they can also get direct income money to help their production routine, their processes. But when you hear this particular issue, when they say provide relief, they mean doing that by cutting the wages of migrant workers. I told you that even Trump supporters are against this. So you got hardliners on immigration who say, look, we don't even need all of these foreigners coming over here. Why are they upset about this? Well, what we're looking to do is make cheap labor cheaper labor. What happens when you make cheaper labor even cheaper? You're undercutting what domestic American workers are able to make. So the reason we're having to use so many foreign workers is because we pay them so little money. Most American workers will not work for that wage. So when you make it even cheaper, you're hurting American workers in the long run. What are the labor rights activists saying? Well, they said, look, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Our focus should be on protecting these essential and most vulnerable workers. Now, I'm curious, as you're commenting, who else do you think of as essential workers? Were you thinking of farmers when you think of essential workers? Have you been thinking of farm workers? So immigrant rights activists are up in arms. Immigrant hardliners are up in arms. Here's what we should really think about. We've been outraged at how the little man, the little woman, right? The poor man, the poor woman has been treated during this. We've been wanting to make sure that the least of these are being covered. These are also in the category of the least of these. It would be a cruel attack right now to cut wages on the most vulnerable workers who are currently, ironically, risking their own health, their own safety to help stock the grocery stores that you guys are still able to go to. They are literally putting food on American tables in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, in the midst of the outbreak. And so what you have to think about is you have immigrant farm workers who are risking their lives without the protection they need. And the country is now looking to exclude them from the very federal relief packages that they've been working to get to us as Americans. People will still say, Jade, stop calling them Americans. They're foreign workers. They're not our workers. Let me ask you this. Do you know which pair of hands helped get the food that you're eating onto your table? Was it a domestic worker, American born? Was it a foreign worker who was just here on the H-2A visa, has to leave in a year? Whose hands got that food to your table? I believe that we must start taking a more restorative stance in everything that we do. We must look for the way to express some version of equality in all of our solutions. Now, what you'll hear the administration tell you over and over is, look, we've got to help our workers, our farmers. We have to help our farmers. Well, one of the ways we could help our farmers is to revisit the retaliatory tariffs that we've been setting where trade is concerned. Farmers themselves will tell you that was an unexpected blow for them. This is the president that they support. And many of them are watching their businesses, their livelihoods be martyred in support of this president they still support, but they're seeing their own businesses take a hit. I don't believe when I tell you that we make sacrifices, I believe we should be able to choose the personal sacrifices that we make. And we need to be very careful when we're sacrificing people. So we need to choose to make personal sacrifices. We need to avoid sacrificing people. And I think that's what we're doing here. Here's the danger here. Let's say you don't think in humanitarian terms, you think more in economic terms, you think more in public safety terms. How many of you would like to see a strike by migrant workers right now in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic? We have to think that way. When we take away the ability to live a sustainable life, you leave people without the option for viable recourse. And so I saw one of the workers themselves say, his words, like other workers protesting and striking across the country, we must use our labor to demand basic dignity and protection that we deserve. That's a call to arms. The last thing we need right now, as we should be focusing on restarting, focusing on recovering, focusing on protecting a resurgence, protecting from a resurgence, would we really want to have to contend with a strike right now from the very workers who've already risked their lives to make sure that we can still eat during this crisis? So here's what I believe is the truth. I don't think that the panic related right now that we're seeing drummed up, there's a panic to help our farmers, that's real. I don't believe that it's about what we're being told. We're being told this is not about the migrant worker. This is about making sure our farmers can stay in business. That is so important, right? But what you're going to be told is that we're only forcing this now because of COVID, that because of this crisis, we need to lower wages so that our farmers can stay in business. That's the only reason we're talking about it now. The truth is that's not the truth. If you do your own research, you'll find that there has been a war now to lower these wages for quite some time, to get cheaper and cheaper labor for quite some time. COVID is conveniently being used as the cover for that. So I don't believe that the panic we're seeing right now is actually related to food security for the nation because of COVID. If it truly were, we'd be looking for better ways to equip all of our farm workers, because we should actually want them to be safe and not infected as they deal with our food, right? We need to be making sure that they had access to facilities to wash their hands. You know that many of these migrant workers do not have access to hand washing facilities while they are doing their work. If this were really about being secure and safe during this crisis and really making sure that our farmers had the best as well, we'd be helping them be able to provide more accurate and adequate, housing for their workers, so they're not in bunkers that are in such tight quarters they can't even practice social distancing. So when you start to see the incongruencies here, this is what we want to begin to be aware of as American citizens. I don't care who your favorite pony in the race is, right? People wonder who my ulterior motive is. My ulterior motive is that we begin to move, think, and speak differently as independent individuals who can think for themselves and not have to be beholden to party lines and mimic the talking points of either side. I want us to become wholly dependent no matter what side you prefer to vote for. I want us to think independently. So when you see those incongruencies, you must ask questions. We have to know now that we are going to need to make changes. Someone was reminding me today, one of my economic advisors was reminding me that the root of the word crisis, the real meaning of the word crisis is change. The meaning of the word crisis is change. It's a powerful opportunity to use the crisis period we're in to make powerful changes. But we don't use the crisis we're in as a cover-up for a motive that is not purely related to the kind of relief that needs to be offered right now in the crisis, right? So some growers we know have signed union contracts. So just in their defense, they do provide better wages and benefits in order to attract a more stable workforce. But we do know that there are a lot of growers, a lot of organizations that are working to get rid of those or lower those federally mandated pay rates for guest workers. And they want to see those wages brought down. If you're wondering if these workers are really all millionaires and that they are just being too stingy and not wanting to share in the sacrifice during COVID, I want you to hear some of the difference in the amounts of money paid. If you're a farm worker and a laborer, crop worker, nursery, and you're on the H-2A, your hourly wage is about $11.84. If you are working as a domestic worker, you're gonna make about $12.05, only a 2% difference, not a very big difference there. But if you operate some of the agricultural equipment, you're a foreign worker, you're making $12.25 an hour. American worker, you're making $15.12 an hour. Even bigger disparities, if you are a construction laborer, you're making $12.48. If you're an American worker, you're making $18.70. Last one here, if you're a first line supervisor of farming, of fishing, you're making $12.39 an hour if you're a foreign worker, a migrant worker. If you're an American worker, a domestic worker, you're making $24.11, almost double what your foreign worker counterpart makes. Why am I saying that? Because when you start hearing people say that these migrant workers need to just take it on the chin and make the same sacrifices that we're making, I want you to know the sacrifice is not the same. The average farm worker makes between $17,000 and $19,000 a year. A year. A quarter of all farm worker families earned below the federal poverty line. So what we are proposing, I always say we, even if it's not me, even if it's not technically you, because we must start thinking in terms of we. We must look at decisions being made by our nation, by our leadership as our decisions, because I believe then we take more ownership, then we speak up more and we say, I don't want to be represented that way. If we make this move, if we cut down farm worker wages, like I just talked about, if we cut those wages, what you're saying is that during the middle of a crisis, where every industry is hit, by the way, the richest to the poorest people are hit. If you then say, we're now going to go and get our poorest and take further from them, it's absolutely unfair. It is the exact opposite of what we should be doing, especially since even though they're foreign, I keep hearing it, Jade, they're not us. We should be thinking about Americans. I want us to have a redefinition here. Here's my restorative stance that I'm going to end with. First of all, I believe we don't kick people when they're down. That shouldn't be the American way. We do not kick people when they're down. We also do not use crises as cover-ups for our earlier motives. If you don't believe me, check back. You'll see as recently as 2018, 2019, that people were going to court over this very issue, trying to lower these wages. Had nothing to do with COVID. You'll find articles from January, but they'll be from 2019 because this issue is not a new issue. And what's being used now is you're seeing organizations that have always wanted these wages lower, that have always wanted cheaper labor. They've always been trying to make this move. And this is a convenient time to make the move. And so I believe in a restorative stance, we don't kick people when they're down. We look for solutions that can put everybody in a position to prosper. And how do we use a crisis? We use it to serve as a catalyst for change. That means that this is obviously a discussion that needs to be revisited. We do need to look at farm worker wages because we are currently also undercutting American farm worker wages. Why? Because it's cheaper to get people from work from elsewhere. But we need to have a reckoning of that. Do we want cheaper labor? And do we want to keep undercutting what we have here in America? Or do we want to just pay people what they're worth and let competition, which we seem to love so much, actually reign true? Let people really compete for jobs at a fair wage. This is a discussion we need to have. Guess when we have it though? Not right now. Right now, our focus should still be on getting out of the pandemic properly and then pandemic proofing for the future. We believe that you must look for solutions now that can put everybody in a position to prosper. When we hear to prosper, when you hear our people, I dare you to start thinking this way. When you hear our people, I want you to think of these workers, foreign workers, farm workers, as working for our interest, on our soil, on our terms, for our benefit. If they're doing all of that for us, then they should be considered our people, especially in a time of crisis and a time of need. I hope that that shifts some mindsets a bit. We're excited about offering every night a new restorative stance, because what I'm determined to be sure of is that you understand what we're trying to offer is an alternative to the way that we've been doing business as usual, an alternative to the way that we've been doing politics before. We're trying to give an alternative to the status quo. And if you don't believe me, you watch right now and you'll already see red and blue fighting against each other in the middle of the pandemic, positioning for power. And what we never want to be seen as is positioning for power, but positioning for people. If that resonates with you, I dare you to share this boldly, and don't just click share. Tell people exactly what resonated. Tell people what point of view it really, really resonated with you, so that they understand why you're sharing what you're sharing. I'm going back through the comments now. Division will always be there, Diana says. That is the truth. Rich versus poor. However, the Constitution was written for a cover up as well, she says. That's why it's going to take a fresh voice to reread and apply that Constitution to the people and for the people. Listen, Diana, one thing I've been saying is that we have to be thinking in terms of more we. We know, whether you're looking in biblical terms or you're looking just in historical terms, division will always be there. What I do not believe has to exist is rampant division. I believe that there must be more people who feel like you and I do, that when we look at both sides, we're not hearing ourselves. And the reason you're not hearing yourself is because if you're speaking in a way that promotes unity, in a way that dares to find common ground with your enemy, that dares to see ways that we can work together, it's not popular. It's not popular because it's not profitable. It will always be more profitable to pit us against each other. It's easier for me to stay in office if I pit you against the people that are trying to get me out of office. It will always be more profitable to be divisive. And so what we're saying now is that winning is not the only way to win, that you must look for victory. And if a part of that victory along the way to the win is getting people to see more common ground, then we must do that. And you talk about the Constitution, interpretation is a beast. And if you look at the stuff that happened after the Constitution, including slavery, you understand that interpretation is everything. And so I think we need now not so much a reinterpretation of the Constitution, because I believe the Constitution was written in a way that it can be interpreted to serve us all. But I think we have to look now at a reinterpretation of the way we govern, a reinterpretation of the way that we lead. I'm looking back again at some of your comments here. It needs to be, she says, not about money, Jennifer is saying. We believe that you're supposed to always prioritize people over profit. The irony of that is that when you do that, you will prosper. Think about it, even in the midst of COVID-19, if you prioritize the economy and you restart the economy early and you don't take the proper precautions, you don't know who has the illness, you don't know who's yet to get it, you don't know all the causes of why certain demographics get it over another. We're still looking at the solution itself. People aren't talking about this very often because we put so much emphasis on ventilators at the beginning of this crisis. A lot of people aren't being helped by the ventilators. There are other causes. Our doctors and nurses haven't even had the time to just learn about the illness itself. There's still so much we have to learn. And so if we rush to get the economy back just because it feels good to flip a switch, and then we cause a resurgence, we cause another shutdown, we cause there to be another stimulus that needs to go out, which already another one needs to go out. But you see what I'm saying? If you prioritize people first, yes, there is pain on this side of that. There's delay, but to get it right, to lay the right tracks so that when you flip the switch and say, now we're back in business, we get to stay in business without making the situation worse for ourselves. So I think whenever you prioritize people, you always prosper. And I think when you broaden the definition of our and us, when you broaden the definition of our and us, you're always going to prosper in that way as well. I believe, and I'm ending with this, we need to choose to value people before we're forced to value people, because then those very people won't feel valued. And when people don't feel valued, they don't stay. They don't stay. So we can kid ourselves and think that we don't need foreign workers right now in the middle of this crisis, but you let them strike and we will see how powerful and important that 10% of the farm worker population really is. I, for one, would rather spend time figuring out how to protect all of our workers, figuring out how to raise the wages so all of our workers can be treated fairly and actually afford a sustainable life above the poverty line, because they put food on our tables. How can we dare take food off of theirs? Okay, I hope that sit well with you. If it didn't, let me know as well, and I'll get time to go back and look through the comments. If I couldn't see yours tonight while I was live, I apologize. I do spend a little bit of time right after the broadcast responding to you. Thank you so much for sharing. You're going to go to operationrestoration2020.com. Let people know that you're finding out there is another option. Let them know it's a viable option. We have discovered a path for an independent candidate to go all the way to the White House. We would not be wasting your time if we didn't believe this was something that was not only necessary, but possible. Next week, you're going to join us. I am talking in depth with some of my very own advisors, some what I call local influencers and regional influencers in the world of healthcare. That'll be on Monday of next week for our first virtual listening tour stop. Then on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the economy. I'm talking about a whole new way of talking about the economy, a whole new way of talking about prosperity that affects every American, not just the wealthiest of Americans. And then next week, Friday, we're talking about education. Why are we talking about those three things? Because they are being drastically affected right now by COVID. And I want to talk about the ways we can get ready for our new normal. You're going to join in if you have ideas of your own, questions of your own about those three areas. We'll be going live on Facebook with those virtual tours starting Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of next week. Look for more details on the Facebook page, Operation Restoration 2020. In the meantime, be blessed. And remember that when we begin to think more like a nation who is supposed to be one nation under God and indivisible, we'll be able to finally restore and soar. Okay, have a good night. Look forward to talking to you soon.